Hello, project people. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Project Chatter podcast, your favorite podcast. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for your favorite podcast player. And we are on YouTube, so come check out our friendly faces. Now, Dale, how are you, sir? I hear you're having a heat wave still.
Yeah, it's still going on. There's something happening in this world where we have floods and disasters and heat waves everywhere, but I'm not complaining. I'm enjoying it. I mean, Mr. Curriston probably suffers a little bit with the factor 50. So how are you handling the heat, Martin?
Unlike you, I am complaining. It's torture as a ginger. It's not very good.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Factor 500.
Need it.
Okay, let's get into it, guys. We're welcomed today by Mr. Martin Murphy. How are you today, sir?
I'm very well. I used to be a ginger as well when I had hair. So I don't like the heat either.
Well, there you go, Mr. Curriston. There's hopefully that nice silver fox look. Mr. Martin Murphy, it's great to have you on board. Obviously, we've got two Martins, so we just have to be clear, Dale, which Martin we're referring to.
How are we going to do this?
Look, yeah, I don't know. We'll have to come up with some nicknames, I guess. We'll figure it out along the way. But before we get into it, I just want to kick off the first question, Mr. Murphy. I might call you Mr. Murphy. Can I do that? That sounds too formal.
Yeah,
doesn't
that's fine.
Yeah,
fine.
yeah.
It doesn't
Mr.
at all.
Murphy.
I know it's good for differentiation.
I just want to get into this straight away and ask the first question about it. So why does quality matter in schedules?
One of the things I have felt in my many years planning, I'm still planning, and is that you have to invest. You have to invest at the beginning to recoup benefit afterwards, and it's like anything you do. So one of your podcasts regarding visual planning, etc. It all requires much more front end work. My experience is that first of all, the schedule's there to, in a basic sense, to see more or less when you're going to finish a project, but it's also there to see what you have to do next week, what you have to do the week after. And schedule quality is intrinsic in knowing that you're not going to have to be editing everything every week. I always say that the schedule quality, a good quality schedule, it's a bit like watching a video versus a photograph. A bad quality schedule is a photograph taken at a particular moment in time. And the bars, if you like, if we're representing it with activities with a bar chart, the bars are stuck in time. But as soon as something changes, you have to redraw the whole thing. And for me, a good quality schedule means you can benefit from that during the 10, 20, 30 months of the project. And of course, you have to edit and adjust, but it gives you a bit of predictability, gives you a bit of stability, and also a communication tool that's easier for people, and that there's a rationale and people can understand it. And so I'm a little bit, if you like, right wing in terms of standardization, in terms of criteria and how we do things. And my experience is literally getting back to what I've said at the beginning. You invest at the beginning in a good quality schedule, and you reap the benefits during the life of the project, and you work a lot less during the life of the project.
Yeah, that's well succinct there, Mr. Murphy. And obviously, you're referring to kind of the waterfall type schedules, or all types of schedules, or what do you mean in terms of quality schedules?
Well, for instance, lately I've used tools for checking schedule quality, right? Before I used to do it on my own, but filters, etc., etc. But the tools I've done expert witness work and claims, and the tools are very good in that sometimes you may agree with the criteria or you may not, but they've got a huge advantage in the sense that they are standardized. They are generic. They are the same in New York as they are in Spain, as they are in London. And one of the things that there's a lot of criteria. There's, the DCMA is one of the major sort of criteria. There's things that I don't agree with, but it's a huge thing to be able to go, and when you're on the opposing party in a claim, for instance, and say that, look, this schedule scores 32%, and it's 20% on the percentile of equivalent schedules, blah, blah, blah. Therefore, this schedule is not a good tool to either have run the job, nor to even forecast delay or whatever, right? So for me, I feel schedule quality is not only those criteria, sort of the 14 type sort of DCMA or NEC or whatever other criteria we use, but it's also how you structure the schedule, how you try to standardize into, you're not having to get someone to look for Wally every time they're trying to understand the schedule. And that's where I feel, bar chart type, whatever, and I'm thinking about Microsoft Project, P6, whatever type of schedule. I have felt that we should get the schedule, the right level of detail, and it's not the most detailed, it's the right level of detail, and get it in a logic completely, no open ends. The basic belts and braces type stuff. And then there's a huge amount of other stuff. But for me, logic and the fact, for me, one of the basic criteria when I try to teach this and when I get new people in our group and we start training them in, is the schedule should react logically to delay. That for me is vital. If something happens in the project during the month and you say, God, the schedule more or less is adjusted, has adjusted that reality, then you probably have got a fairly good schedule. And of course, you'll have to adjust it. And of course, you'll have to put contingency and new things. But for me, the schedule is a database. And this is one of the things that I don't like one particular tool for scheduling, because people use it without considering it as a database.
Which one? Sorry, you mentioned one.
Microsoft Project, for instance. People tend to use it, and it can be used to do very good things. But people tend to use it when they don't really care about planning. For me, that's how I see it. And at least in Spain, it's a standard tool, nearly, and it is commensurate with bad quality. You can do the same bad quality on P6 or on Power Project or whatever you want. You can, it's not, you can do good quality on it as well. But there's things, for instance, for me in bigger projects, and I'm not talking about mega projects, multi-billion, for me, a big project is 200 million, 300 million euro, whatever. That's a big project. And at least in Spain, it's a massive project now. There's not that many big ones. But for me, you need a coded schedule. You need a lot of data to dig into the database. You can't rely on WBS only. And Microsoft Project, for instance, I feel has got the activity coding sort of hidden behind it. It's not very well, it's not a robust, it's not something that's up there in front of you when you go into the Microsoft Project. Very few people who use Project use the activity coding, which has got that capability. But whereas P6 and P3 in Malaysia, when I used P3 for the Petronas Towers, I had to get my head around this coding. I had, on the plane into Malaysia, I had the P6 manual on my knees reading it. And I had spent my life planning, my 5 or 6 years planning, but I hadn't a clue about coding. So, and you realize it's a big database. It's a huge database. You need to make it work for you. And you can only make it work for you in an orchestrated, organized manner with a good WBS, but a huge, very well dovetailed coding system, ID system, etc. And that's one of the big issues. For instance, at the moment, I'm back to planning because I've got a couple of people off sick and that, so I'm back to planning. So I've got a 5,000 activity contractor schedule in Microsoft Project, and I'm trying to look for Wally every month to see what has changed, because I've got it emulated on P6, and I'm now getting into a system of looking at unique ID in Project, looking at seeing how I can do that, and try to look at some sort of system so that we're not losing time looking for Wally every month to see what has happened, So this is, for me, it's vital to a detailed, and not a detailed, but a good quality schedule.
Did you say looking for Wally? Is that what you just said?
Yes.
What's that
You've
mean?
heard, you've seen that comic?
Yeah. I thought that's what you meant. Where's Wally?
Yeah. Where's Wally?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I've been out of England for 30 years, guys. Looking for Wally's the best I can get,
What do they call it in Spanish? What do they call it in Spanish, man?
I have said looking for Wally. It probably not even
That's
translated.
So good.
But
looking for Wally's.
Even, you talk about project management. I talk about project management, because I've been in project management for 30 years, but all in Spain. Before that, I was a GC. So for me, it's project management. I don't care whether you guys say project management or not. Spanish is it's not O, it's O. So it's project management. So unfortunately, my English, I do what I can, guys.
It's fine. It's fine. Look, I would want to pick out a few things that for the audience is, if you haven't checked out the 14-point DCMA checklist or point assessment, you can. I recommend 10.6 because I've used that site since I was a wee little planner. They've got a very, very succinct way of understanding that information.
Yeah.
But I'm going to come back around to one more question before I pass off to Dale or the other Martin. What about, you talk about having great governance and control up front. You said a little bit right-leaning when it comes to the management of quality and the schedule. And that obviously, there's some great tools. Like you said, Microsoft Project's probably not the best tool for it, let's be honest. We all kind of nodded when you said that. So there was consensus, even if it was silent, there was some consensus in the room.
Yeah.
But I want to know about existing schedules. So a lot of the time, these big programs, they go on for years and years and years. And usually with planners, you kind of get dumped in it, especially if you're good. And you kind of have a very little control over the start of the schedule. And the project's already bolted. So you're kind of in delivery, let's say. How do you go about improving the quality of the schedule once the project's already started?
Well, Val, I had a contract last year. I've done a lot of work doing train manufacturing. I mentioned to you before in another call, doing the scheduling for literally the train manufacturing, the rolling stock manufacturing, not the rail laying, no, but the fabrication. Trains. And so I one of the big challenges last year was that the client asked me to please look at 18 projects all around the world that they had, most of them fabricated in Spain, but also fabricated in US and in France, and they've got different factories all over the world. And I said, look, guys, I have to give you a proposal for this. I have to, because they wanted a fixed price proposal of what it was going to cost to do all this, right? So I said, well, okay. At this time, the scheduling tool that I used to the schedule quality tool wasn't as sophisticated as it is now. It's got a huge bit more sophisticated in the last couple of months. It's really, and I've used two different ones. It doesn't matter if I mention the name, is it, guys? No problem. Toolkit, XCR Toolkit is the one I use now.
Yeah, I know that one.
A hell of a lot cheaper than, and I do love the Deltec Acumen Fuse, but XCR Toolkit has got huge improvements in the last I think 2 or 3 months actually. And so, but before last year when I done it, I had to do an Excel sheet where I give a weighted value to each of the criteria. And I plugged all these programs into the SIR Toolkit, and I got a score, right? And I basically said, look, guys, we need to get those scores, and this is the basic stuff. We need to get those scores up to about 85%. They're now 50, 60, 32, whatever. And so one of the things I done was, number one was look at the schedule detail. How detailed is the schedule? How representative is it of what's going to happen in the future and what we're going to need weekly or monthly? We do a lot of these projects, we update them weekly, or we do progress control weekly. A lot of the other ones are monthly. So you land and you look at the schedule, get it in, you look at obviously predecessors, successors, you get that sorted, make sure at least the detail that's there is as robust as it can be with the existing activities. You look at the structure of the schedule, see if you could readjust some of the WBS or some of the organizational coding, give it some more coding to give it a bit more flexibility in terms of how you use it. And then you would look at where you need to drill down in detail and look at, say, look, okay, maybe in the next, in 12 months to 20 months ahead, we don't have to worry too much about that detail, but we do need to worry about detail in the next, 6-8 months and start getting into looking at the schedule. And one of the things when I give this sort of charts and that, I say, well, look, what do you want the schedule to do? If you want the schedule only to estimate the end date of the project in a global sense, then any piece of crap can do, and could even be well organized crap. I can do a 5-activity schedule for construction for any building, and I could practically say that I could get it within +1 - 1 month. But it'll not tell me what I have to do next week. It'll give me 5 big bars, you know. So for me, once you start saying, well, I need to know what I need to do next week to be able to comply with that 30 months or 20 months or whatever. Therefore, you need to get into detail. So then you start looking at what's the parameters of detail. And I've you know, I'm a bit of, as I say, we say it in Spain a bit Taliban. We're a bit dramatic, a bit right wing in terms of how we do things. So I'm a bit, I'm a bit probably more in favor of detail than in less detail. But I've committed some serious errors in my past when I was young and inexperienced in doing too much detail and not being able to manage it. And I've actually got round to knowing exactly how many activities a planner can manage. Because when I tender for a project where I'm only doing consultancy for planning, I need to know how many people I need because I have to give a fixed price. So I've come round to the fact that a good planner or reasonable planner, dedicated 100% of his time, can manage around 200 activities a month. Full stop. That's it.
A good planner.
A good planner. Now, we have been able to manage on these fabrication projects, we've been able to manage up to 400 because it's a very standardized process, because it's a very serious sort of process. But on a normal project, that's about the height of it. I've got down to doing the worst thing I can get is a hyperactive planner with a project manager or site manager who loves planning. That's the worst. That's the worst mix you can get, because we ended up with a program that was 4 times the size after 1 month. Beautiful program, and I had to throw it in the bin because I had only 20% of dedication to do the management of it. So I had to throw it in the bin and do another one of 800 activities instead of 3,000. You know what I mean? So for me, there's a detail. And there's a reasons to make the program more detailed, and activity duration type things. But there is also a sanity check of, do I have the resources to manage this? If you don't, well, don't do it.
Yeah.
Because and so I've got that down now, because I've been doing this for 25 years, doing sort of consultancy with it as well, and I've had to pitch my case for the number of activities, and it works. And so
you bring up some good points. Yeah. So I'm just going to cut in. I know Dale wants to get some questions in as well. Murphy, Mr. Murphy, let's call you. But the 2 points there are really interesting. Is there a maximum productivity rate per planner? So by number of activities, that's an interesting point, I think, for everyone to scratch their heads while they're listening to that. And the other one is around actually the level of detail that you go down to, which I think is actually one of the fine arts of being a good planner, is to know how far you go, and appease, all the lords and masters, the project managers, the senior directors, the client. Because if the client had their way, isn't this true, Mr. Murphy, that they would want the nth degree of detail. They want everything in there. They want to be able to see every single thing. They want to know when you go to the toilet. They want to know when you blow your nose. And it's just not manageable, which I know there was a really good point you brought back up. So thank you for that. Now, Dale, did you have any questions? No, you do. Get in there.
Loads of questions, loads of thoughts. I love just listening there into Mr. Murphy. But you mentioned you disagree with some of the measures, and we like that when there's disagreement. Can you be specific about which ones you disagree with and why?
Very, very much so. And I've got a really stickling point about one of them. I don't agree with the aversion to start, finish relationships, the mix of start. I don't agree with that aversion. For me, it's in construction, it may be valid. The finish start bias may be valid in investigation type things, where you have very little idea of how activities interact with each other. But in normal construction, in my life, we do an awful lot of offices, even residential or whatever, and you cannot permit, not remotely, the luxury of saying that this is all finished start, right? So you cannot even contemplate that. So for number one, for me, the finished start bias for me is not right. And so there's another one is the ratio that penalizes you well on that. Yep. So what I've done, the one good thing about the new tool in SARE Toolkit is you can do your personalized schemes.
Thresholds. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can put your own schemes, and there are schemes that are valid for a project that you're starting. There are schemes that are valid for a project that lasts 24 months, 20 months, 12 months, right? And the other thing I don't like is the absolute duration criteria and float duration. For me, it's crazy to talk about 44 days as that's it. That's a high duration activity. Anything above 44 days is high duration. Anything below 44 days is not high duration. Well, it depends on how long the project's left. For me, it should be 1% of the remaining duration of the project. You know, because like a fit out of a shop in the high street will be 3 months. You can't even contemplate a 44-day duration. That's not criteria. So for me, the logic would be, and I've got round to doing a couple on the SARE Toolkit, but the logic would be have a program that's starting, right? So it's a fresh baseline, and you have a fresh baseline for 12 month, a 6 month, an 18 month, and you adjust the thresholds regarding that. So there are a couple of things, but the other ones are, for instance, I would love, and none of them do it yet. For instance, the lags or the leads, for instance, that for me is a no-no, complete and utter no-no. But for instance, start zero should be penalized, except where you have a milestone or a level of effort. Start zero for me should not exist. I have never been able to get anybody tell me the logic of one activity conditioning the next, but they can start on the same millisecond, right? So please, someone tell me it. And you know what it is? It's people being too lazy to get the proper predecessor or activity B.
Yeah.
And of course, the same goes with the finish. So for me, we should be looking at the length of lags. We should be looking at a start, finish that 99.9% of the time have to come in pairs. They must come in pairs. If you've got a start, you've got a finish. Negative lags, absolutely nothing. No, cannot happen. And that's unfortunately our Microsoft project is the only way of getting a double link. And there's a joke, you know that, guys, that the Irish, we are considered the stupid ones for the English. I'm sorry, Martin. We are. We accept it. And we've got very broad back. But there's a joke in Ireland that if you ask, you know, the Irish are very, very hospitable. You ask an Irishman, you know, the directions for some place, and he'll tell you, you know, there's this joke that you go and you ask him, English guy comes, ask the Irish guy, you know, and he says, look, you do go this, go right, go left. And then 1 kilometer before you go to the bridge, you reach the bridge, you turn right. And that's the negative lags in Microsoft project. You have to get to the end before you know when you can start halfway through. It's crazy. It defies logic. So for me, the start, finish thing should be start, finish, lags, proportional, maximum proportion of their predecessor. Finish, maximum proportion of their successor. That's quality. Because then you're looking at something that's got a sensible logic between the two things interacting. And also it has to be designed. I've given this sort of project controls course to about 2,500 people probably in my 20 years doing, at least all over the world. And I've asked a question about a start, finish link, just between two activities, stupid activities on a project. And I've said, okay, so you've got the start. Okay, guys, we've got start. So what's the finish going to be? And only 2 people have answered me correctly. 2 girls in Spain, and planners that have been 20-year planning in Dubai and Doha and that in my same company haven't got the right answer. And I've been lucky enough to contract one of the girls that I give classes to. She's now working with me, starting in the planning department, because 2 people out of 2,500, because we put start, finish to draw the bars. We don't put it to show the process. So if we only draw the bars, next week, that drawing will not be convenient for us. So I'm there with my 5,000 Microsoft project activity schedules, trying to get my head around lags that change because I want to draw the position of the bars. And every month they get cut down So I'm having to look for Wally or search for Wally or find Wally or whatever the hell you want to do with Wally. I'm having to do it looking at the change in lags monthly, and it's crazy. It adds about 3 times more time to my analysis than I would do with a normal stable schedule, you know.
Yeah, that's really
Sorry,
interesting.
guys, I get passionate about it.
No, this
It's
is
great.
fantastic. I love it. I love it. But you're right. It's like you almost starting with this is the answer, so make it fit. Whereas actually no, you should be if you do proper scheduling, it tells you what the answer is. Absolutely. Rather than the other way around. And so it's very interesting. But the great thing is that we have spoken to Dr. Dan Patterson previously. So we can also recommend any improvements, not on Fuse anymore, but any other improvements he might be making on products, because we actually have him on the next episode as well.
Right. Excellent.
Mr. Murphy. So yeah, we'll certainly pass on your ideas. But now that you've had your rant, what are your favorite measures? Because surely you are extremely passionate. You also have your favorite measures that you go to, or is there not such a thing?
Oh, yes. Like in terms of quality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, predecessors, successors. That's only one. 2 activities can have one start milestone, finish milestone. Nothing else. I don't care what it is. If it's a milestone, it's a flag, whatever you want. It's got because when I get my I was amazed to think that people didn't look at the report coming out from Primavera, the calculation report. People weren't actually looking out of sequence progress. Come on, guys. So for instance, that's one thing. The next one, high floats. For me, it's lack of logic. Nearly always lack of logic. There's very few things in this world can start and finish any time up to the end of the project. It's madness. So for me, that's the if you like, obviously high durations. But also for me, one of the things is coding. I must admit that I was anti-WBS until P6 came along, because P3 was a pain in the butt with W. It was like binary code. For me, it just was unworkable. P6 has improved radically. At the same time as P6 went backwards with regard to the ID, P3 allowed you to program your ID. Unfortunately, P6 doesn't. But for me, the quality is, I'm looking for uniqueness in the schedule. So I'm looking for a stable ID. I'm looking for an ID that's, as I call, semi-intelligent, so that it allows the planner to know what he's linking to. So the planner knows that, and also even things like my same activity in the schedule, let's say duct work on any floor in any area, will always finish at with the same 3 digits. So that any link between the same ending is always a resource link. It's not a hard logic link. So it helps to make people understand that. It helps you to export links, import links, change them, mash them up in Microsoft, in Excel, and bring them back in, because you've got a stable database, right? And the other thing for me, for instance, one of the things, and I'll just let you into a secret that I found out about 2010, I was introduced once again, or got back introduced to Pertmaster. It was my first program that I used in Spain when I arrived in MS-DOS, guys. Pertmaster was the planning tool that then lost the ground to SureTrack and Primavera, right? So I was reintroduced to Pertmaster in the now PRA for risk analysis, and there was me thinking that I was a good planner, that I was doing the business, and I only then realized that my schedule had, nearly any schedule, the better it was, the worse probability it had of complying with the end date. And this is where I realized that my schedules, good schedules, had about a 3% probability of hitting the end date. And that was another shock for me. And honestly, guys, I've done this on quite a few projects since that, and it always comes out around 3%. It is scandalous that our schedules, and I would like to think, good, solid, linked, detailed schedules, the more detailed, the more linked, the least probability it has of complying with the end date. And that was, like, it really floored me. And I came to the conclusion, there was one really simple reason for that. Budgeting in the project controls. I'm not into cost control. I've done it a bit, but I don't know about costs. I know about time. But budgeting, the concept of contingencies is so understood, so established, nobody even questions it. You're in agreement, correct? Everybody understands it. Nobody, or I have hardly ever seen anybody that understands or accepts, or a client that will accept contingencies in schedule. It's madness. So therefore, how I done an analysis of about 50 projects of ours. We had a 7 or 8% deviation in schedule, like i.e. bad deviation. And we were about 0.5% on the budget in project, in cost, because we use contingencies. So that's another quality issue for me, is do you have contingencies? How are you going to manage it? And I've only had one project, to be very frank, that I'd be able to manage contingencies. And I was able to even plot the delay that it was going to happen. I was able to put it on a graph, say that I'm going to delay because the contractor hasn't allowed for holidays, He hasn't got a decent calendar in. He's going to be working on Christmas Day. He's not going to be working on Christmas Day. So that's going to be a delay. So all I had to do was plot when I was going to incur in all the delays, and to be able to say to a client every month, Mr. Client, we've delayed the expected delay. The contractor has delayed the expected delay, and you graph it. The client starts thinking, God, this doesn't look bad. Do you know what I mean? And so me, that's another one issue, contingencies. For me, activity codes have to be robust. WBS is just the start of the story. You cannot manage a decent size schedule without a robust set of activity codes that anybody can pick up, because in the department that I run here, we all interchange schedules. So if someone's on holiday, someone picks it up, does the update, bing, speaks to the project manager. It's not his project or her project, but they manage it. So you need to have absolute standardization and clarity, And as I said, I don't know, maybe I haven't went into all of them, but for me, the logic is the biggie. Durations. For me, one of the things, I always look for a 2 to 3 week maximum duration of activities. And the other thing, I remember I had a big discussion prior to going to the Petronas Towers, the rolling wave approach.
Yeah.
I must admit, and I'm sorry, guys, I just don't cut it with the rolling wave. For me, to be very frank, as a project manager, even, Jesus, we should know how to build a building, to be honest. So even if I've got a schematic design, you should be able to pull out a schedule of a typical floor. Let's say, the structure in a building is simple. It just can go up. It's not an awful secret. So why not detail the schedule out? And typically, when I went onto the Petronas Towers, 85 floors, 2 towers, and we done the whole fit out. And I was the contractor scheduler. And I was on rolling wave. And I said, why? I've got 85 nearly similar floors. I do one really well, multiply it by 85, multiply it by 2, link the recorded resources in the thing, and boom, I've got a 12,500 activity schedule in 2 months. And I know that I've got the skirting board on level 85, and maybe I've got it linked wrongly. But when I get to it in a year and a half's time, I'll change it. But it's there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So the concept of rolling wave, I can understand where we're doing nearly a job at the same time as we're designing it. But I've never been able to understand the concept of how I link the detailed short term with the medium, not detailed long term. And it's probably my defect, guys, because I've always tried to get the schedule detailed out as much whenever we have the information to do it. Otherwise, and my projects are more repetitive than we would like to give them credit for, to be quite honest.
And that's probably the point, right? The more repetition there is, the easier it is to plan out in detail into the future. So I think your point is basically there's a time and place for rolling wave, but in your projects and your experience, the ones you've been on, it hasn't applied, which is great. But I do want to also, I do want to get young Martin in, but before I do, just one more from me. You talk about the various cultures we've spoken previously as well around, being in Spain versus the UK and elsewhere in the world. Is there varying degrees of schedule quality geographically, or is it across the globe a standard? Because you spoke about the cultural implications on contractual setups. I wonder if the same applies for schedules, because the more robust your schedule is, then the less, I guess, trust, collaboration you potentially require within your teams, because you're all following that schedule. It's detailed, you can follow it. But if you all know what you're doing, maybe you don't need all of that detail. I don't know. I'm just trying to throw different angles at it.
Dale, I would say there is this correlation in the more cultural side, the more Latin culture. Time, honestly, the time is money concept. Time equals money. Sometimes it's not ingrained in the people. However, it was very interesting back a few years ago. The CIOB pulled out the planning of complex projects. It's a very good document. The book they done and the subsequent contract. It's the only contract that I have seen, the complex projects, the CPC. I think it's complex projects contract or something like that. It's the only contract that brings the schedule into some, as I think at least, brings it up into some degree of importance in terms of specification of the same within the contract. But so in many ways, I always, and the Spanish, and I daily consider myself now, we tend to beat ourselves a lot on the head with how bad we are. But then suddenly you see a book like that, and the study that went into that prior to that there was a survey done in the whole construction industry, and came up with something like it was disastrous in the British industry, the scheduling. And it was a bit of a comfort for me to think that we're not that bad down south of the Pyrenees, So I think there is a degree, and it's less prevalent because you have less contractual oversight that obliges it, and you have less consultants on top of the consultants on top of the consultants that are looking over your shoulder. So there is a degree of that, but I think it's more worldwide than we would like to probably accept from our, if you like, from our work. We would like to think it was the standard, the bar was higher, and I think it particularly, even if it is high, if you get to a project where someone allows it to go low, the tendency is that people go to the lowest level of requirement. It's not that ingrained in people that they're up there doing their level independently of someone, if someone wants it or not. You know what I mean?
No, I do know what you mean. It's that diminishing returns of granularity that people don't fully appreciate. And also, I think it's a difference potentially between a scheduler and a planner.
Yes.
Those that sort of just sit behind P6 or Microsoft Project and, input into a keyboard, versus those that actually understand what's required to deliver the actual project.
Absolutely.
But young Martin, come on, get in. I know you've got a few questions.
One or two. So my question is, having worked on major projects, we've all lived and breathed the struggles of having a simplified schedule that's appropriate for the planner and for the manager. It's difficult. Sometimes people have had to create rogue schedules, rogue Visios, Excel planners. How do you get around this issue in your experience? How have you managed this? Are there good practice guides? Are there tool sets that within the planning tools that are quite good for this?
Well, young Martin, I was faced with this in this particular client last year, and we had been forced to nearly do a highly complex schedule for a massive project. 18,000 activities in 3 weeks, right? Meetings of 9 hours. We're all in COVID. I had COVID at the time, and we were there getting the whole design, the procurement, the construction, everything. And after doing this mammoth task, we had then once we got the 3-week thing delivered and said, okay, but there's this list of stuff that has to be improved, guys, because this is impossible. And so we done the improvement. And before the summer, one of the client people came back to me and said, Martin, it's as if we have nothing. It's too complex. My planners can't manage it. It's no use. It doesn't tell us what we want to do. And I was just about to commit suicide, after the whole, it was them that had led us to this. But again, it was my responsibility. I was the consultant. I should have been able to detect that or whatever. So I said, but what is it you need? How do you want to see your schedule? They give me an Excel sheet of 1 page, A3, right? Where they had the first, this was trained, right? They had the first 3 cars, the whole design, procurement, all the colors, all segmented, bits and pieces, all done in Excel, drawn physically in Excel. And I said, okay, fine. Give me that. So I worked a week on it. I set up activity codes for the structure, right? So I still had my whole schedule, the exact same way it was. I sent up, it was, they call it the L0 schedule, you know, the level 1, level 2, blah, 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 the L0, right? So I give one code was L0 structure, and the other code was L0 segments. So I use L0 segments to color the bars and to summarize the bars. And suddenly, in a week, they had exactly what they wanted that they had to do manually in Excel. They had that coming out as a report. You press the button and you compare it to baseline, the deviation, and you've got the photograph of about 3,000 activities behind that. You've got it on one sheet because you use codes. You use ways of rehashing all of that information that's got the same WS. You haven't changed anything. You just use a specific one-off code, or two-off in this case code, that allows you to color, allows you to filter the bars. And the coloring, I'm really getting into it now, to be quite honest, because one of the big problems with the scheduling is, like, obviously activity coding, you summarize it, and this is where the WBS is very limited, because you're killed by the structure you've done at the beginning. But I'm always saying, look, I want to see the schedule by package. Now I want to see it by contractor. Now I want to see it by contractor and phase. I want to see it however I want to see it. And I can make it do whatever you want to see. You want a one pager, you want a two pager. You want one because Paul he wants his report and he wants it structurally. Well, I've got a code for Paul. So this is Paul's layout. This is Paul's filter. This is Paul's code. Paul sees the program the way he wants to see it. When you've got the detail, when you've got the database, all you need to do, if you like, is a semi-report writer. But you're not. You're just coding the program and the activity codes in P6. You don't even have to go into the EPPM modules, which is apparently, I haven't got into it yet, a very rich reporting tool. But even with the normal, basic, bog standard P6 with decent codes, with a bit of creativity, you can make the schedule nearly stand on its end. That's how I see it. Nice. That's impressive. We get doing that within the space of a week, and it's really the skill of the planner to detect those kind of issues. How do you think the management's going to want to see it? Yeah. And getting people to live and breathe the schedule, making it visual. So absolutely. Yeah, that's a real win. And another issue we've all faced in our times is schedule adherence metrics, or how we're performing each month. We've all probably been suffered from being measured on binary things, start, finish. If you had your way on a major project, you're the project director now, how would you measure schedule adherence on a period, monthly, 6 monthly, whatever you want? It's a very interesting one, Martin, because one of the things, I think we touched on it earlier on another conversation about earned value, and for me, we are still, in many ways, at least I feel that we're still writing on the cave walls, drawing on the cave walls, and we're, and now there's a new trend on so schedule value and earned value, and like, it's great, and I think that's ideal. But for me, earned value is great. You put value into the schedule. It's reasonably. It has to be homogeneous. The schedule has to be relatively homogeneous. You can't have detail and in my opinion, detail and big long activities all mixed up, because then you have to talk about bell curves on the long activity, that sort of thing, which is a bit dirty, if you like. But for me, if I had earned value, excellent, that's good. But then we start getting into the realms of, but that's not the same as my monthly valuation and their value, and people get a bit confused. So, for instance, an activity counter. I'm doing a project of, I do a bit of everything. 34 chalets. We're doing it for the contractor. It's 4,000 activity schedule. They want a detail, so we're working for the contractor. And they want to have sort of, milestones and that. So I said, well, look, let's put an activity counter on whatever activity you want. So I put a resource, which is called activity counter. I put it skewed onto the last 5% of the duration. So it's only common when it's finished, right? It only appears. So I've got, right. And then we set up a graph system in Excel so that I just paste all my activities that I want, and I select which graphs I want. And I've got how many slabs should have done, how many roofs should have done, how many. So you've got what we should have done, what we have as a photograph, or you've got a graph of whatever you want, right? So for me, even counting activities, Martin, is one of the, in many ways, and this is going back into the contracts management part. Once you start getting rid of the discussion on the procedure, and this is one of the big problems, as a project manager, and I've been on the contractor side, but as a project manager, you get into the discussion, I don't understand that. Okay, let's count activities. This is the graph of the number of activities you should be finishing, and this is the graph of the numbers you're finishing. Yeah, but you're not counting the ones that start. Okay, let's take the average of the start and finish. Fine. But anybody understands that. You need to do 40 activities a week, and you're doing 20. What the hell are you doing? And then you look at resources on site versus plan. And then you look at monthly certification. And so you've got 3 variables for me that are simple stuff. And you've got, in Spain, we're looking at very typically 9,000 to 11,000 euros per month per person on site, right? So you've got a variable there. You've got the number of people, you've got and you've got the pending, and you've got his new S curve that comes out, and it's vertical, the cliff from the contractor. And you say, that's impossible because you've got 200 people on site. And you've got, so for me, it depends on the case. You've got sophisticated guys in front of you. You go sophisticated with earned value, for instance, or whatever, you know. But sometimes you need to get rid of the science and get into you go into a shop and you say to someone, how would you measure, you know, he's supposed to do 10 things a day, he's only done 5. He's 50%. And we do, and sometimes that, I find that is better. And then the contractor gets into from a client's point, the contractor gets into the fray, and he starts talking about, yeah, but you're given the same value to activity that's very long to activity that's very short. Okay, do you want to give us a weighting per duration? Yeah, but then after a couple of weeks, they start waking up and they say, yeah, but that's a very short, a long activity, but it's got very little value. Okay, so do you want to value the program? Fine, we value the program. And then you've got them thinking about earned value. But you've brought them down the road of them showing that they don't want to be measured in a binary way. Fine, I don't mind. I can go from binary to sophisticated. But sometimes you have to say, you have to start in binary. You have to start in, I've got 2 oranges here and I've got an apple here. You know, how many do I've got or whatever? I've got a Macedonia, as we say in Spain, you know.
No, we're with you, Martin. Thanks for that. I just wanted to go back to a few things. One, Pert Master, check out episode 69 with Andrew Wickland. We do talk about Pert Master a bit more, but you know, you've got such a colorful and passionate view on scheduling, and I think it's refreshing because a lot of the time it's a very dry subject. We talk about quality of schedules and we talk about, you know, plans on a page. I mean, you know, this is one of the things that really got us back into kind of doing this podcast, Martin, because we wanted people to get excited again about some of the project management craft. I said project. There you go.
Yes.
And the important thing is that we can explain this to all various levels of experience. So whether you're an experienced scheduler planner or if you're just starting out, I wanted to get to kind of the future because I always put on a future hat, as Dale knows. And I'm thinking, you know, schedule is important. And you're right, the quality of it does value, and I guess it changes based on the client's requirements. But what do you see from your perspective is the biggest advantage to the planning on a craft that is either emerging now or is coming soon?
I do believe, and I was looking at the one on the visual planning, definitely there is a lot to be said about visually planning. And I've been involved with Synchro and done look at using Synchro, right? Not me being the executor of Synchro, because to be quite honest, it's still a wee bit, but I've got, and one of the things regarding the future, Val, that you mentioned, is the training. And for me, it's getting these people young. I do a lot of lecturing and masters with BIM stroke project management masters. So I get the pick of the crop, and you've got people that have got data mindset. For us, for me, we are managers of data, and we call it big data, small data, or whatever we want. But one of the things for me is Synchro. I was involved in a very big project where Synchro, we used it at sort of, let's say, schematic design. So we had the structure completely developed, facade completely developed, roofing, blah, blah, blah. And we done the scheduling at, I don't know, I don't particularly like levels of schedule because it's difficult for me to understand where one level starts and that. But let's imagine an activity, 5 or 6 activities per floor, where there's 15 buildings. So there was 11 models. We all got it together. And I showed the schedule to the client on the video. And the video was, it was a 4-hour session for a 10-minute video where we stopped and we said, well, why are you doing this? No, but we're going to put the protection here. And then, but why do you not do the provisional waterproofing here? Then you can move up. All right, okay, we'll do that. Every building we were looking at and seeing why we were doing what, when, and why. And suddenly you were looking at some of the models were wrong. There's a structure overhang in here. Geez, we're doing the structure without columns. So I do feel, even in the communication of the schedule, even as a communicating tool, let alone the possible implementation. I haven't implemented yet. I'm just about to, because this new girl, she's modeling up one of these projects, and we're going to look at progress control on Synchro. So we're doing our free time, I mentioned the last time, in the middle 2 weeks of the month, where we are doing improvements. At the last week of the month, the first week of the month is getting 25 projects, getting their schedules updated, etc., and their reports done. So in those 2 weeks in the middle, we're looking at Synchro. We're looking at how to improve once you get the building watertight. How do you get into the building to look at how things move? It's not easy in the 3D world. It's a bit. It loses a bit of its attractiveness, but also in the update. And for me, the ability to look at maybe a site photograph from a fixed position and overlay it on where the project should have been, and see red as being the difference of where it should be, and looking at, we're even talking about how the colors, do we put blue for executed and green over the blue for ahead of time? This type of stuff, trying to look at ways of communicating. But for me, the important thing, and one of the things I wanted to talk about, like, we have this central planning service. It's got its pros, it's got its cons. But the good pro it's got is that we get people indoctrinated. They're in here minimum 6 months, maximum 3 years, probably, or some of them stay because they love planning in the thing. And then they go out and either do planning on site, or they go out and do site management. But they have been absolutely brainwashed with planning and brainwashed with quality. And given that one planner's doing 6, 7 projects, some of them small, some of them large, a bigger project like 50 million would have a planner on site. But we have our people on site, our site supervisors, collecting the whole data, looking at the lags, looking at the reports. They're giving us the data, and it makes so for me, quality, for me, the tools like Synchro. And for me, the other thing is, we cannot survive without Excel. We cannot survive without Excel. You need to be able to paste P6 into Excel and make Excel do your whole dashboard, and that's the way you report.
Yeah, you had me till then, Martin, and then you lost me. I'm a fan of everything you just mentioned, but I'm an Excel. It just repels me so much.
No,
I get it.
Come back.
No,
to the
I
phone.
get it. I get it from an I know what you try. If you're trying to pull that information into something, that makes complete sense to me, because you want to report it up, you want to roll it, you want to integrate it with cost, you want to integrate it with quality and all the other kind of attributes. But I feel like there's better tools out there. But you mentioned Synchro, so if we're talking tools about quality as well, I think it's really great. You mentioned visual management. I think that's really cool too. And you mentioned that Synchro was one of the tools you use, but if you're going to mention tools, are there any favorite tools out there for someone who's just getting started? Is this something you have to pay to get involved in BIM and start mocking up your own kind of planning visualization?
At least from my point of view, everybody has to go pass by the cashier's desk. We've got license. Like, one of the things people talk about Primavera, we spoke to a client the other day. Client said, "Whoa, no, sorry, a competitor in the project man. No, we can't even think about Primavera. It's too expensive." And that's it. So you know what you're going to get from that. So for me, I believe, and like I've lost contact. I used to work with Power Project in London when in 88, 89. I was one of the first users of Power Project. Before it was Asta, and it was the first. It wasn't even on Windows. It was a gem thing called. But for me, the visual planning is an important tool. The quality, is for me the PRA, the Monte Carlo. I think in a sensible way, because one of the things that I was involved in a project in the Gem Museum in Egypt, and I had to try to estimate when the job was going to finish. Right, it's a huge project. We've been project managing for the last, well, don't know, many years. It's about to finish, and one of the problems was that how do you estimate with PRA or Monte Carlo if your basic material is defective? So you can only use tools of that level, synchro, when you've got good detailed planning to mesh with them. Synchro, in my opinion, is not a good planning tool per se. Primavera, I would think, is a much better one, but it's a great integrator of models with P6, for instance. But you need the good raw material. You need a good model. You need a good P6. And the same occurs with PRA. You cannot do a probabilistic analysis on a piece of shit.
Yeah.
You can't.
Do you have
because,
then? Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
Because I'm very curious about the risk side of things, particularly with schedules, because they do get manipulated, and we do talk about quality. So this is a really good point that we're pulling in on. What is, you mentioned before that there was kind of a ratio between the number of activities and, you know, the effectiveness or the productivity of a planner, you know, how well they can manage. I think it was a 200-to-1 type thing.
Yes, roughly.
So then is there a correlation between the quality of a risk program using PRA? Because obviously when you do a PRA, for those that don't understand that, you do summarize the program. You're not going to have the whole detailed schedule in there. You're going to summarize to some degree based on the risk register, based on uncertainty. Is there a ratio between the detailed schedule and the summarized risk program as well, from your experience?
Val, to be very frank, I used the PRA on a 12,000 activity schedule. Now I only put the maximum, minimum, the pessimistic, optimistic on a critical path and various subcritical paths. Right? I didn't go into the whole schedule. Right? But I'll tell you a little experience with regard to that. And this, I won't mention the project because I could be slandered for it. Massive, world's biggest project. I mentioned it slightly before we got on air about a coincidence with Alexia. I got on the project. It's my first contact with Pertmaster. In that moment, it was Pertmaster. And there was a 40% probability of the project completing on time. And I looked at the parameters used, right? Let's imagine a wall, massive wall, big thing, was going to take 100 days. That was the duration given in the P6 schedule. Max pessimistic duration, 105. Optimistic duration, 60. Right? So we see the crap. Of course, we're going to get a 40% probability of compliance. We're skewing. It's lies. The optimistic duration is completely skewed. The most logical, and so one of the things. So for me, there is, as I say, I wouldn't be able to tell you, Val, with regard to the general, the overall schedule versus the detail versus that, because I've never done it without doing it on the detailed schedule. Even though, and then so I went to do this. There was a schedule that I was doing for this same train manufacturer for a huge project in South Africa, tender, and one of the criteria was that the project had to have 85% probability of compliance with the schedule. So I went to them as a typical consultant, and I said, well, my experience, which was four experiences, right? But as a consultant, you have to push it up a bit. So my experience is probably have about 3% probability of complying with the schedule. As it happened, they had all these schedules in Power Project, different things. 12,000 activity, tender schedule, right? It was a massive project. 4,000 or 5,000 million in train production. So I put it into P6. And I said, look, okay, so we put it through, and their design team gave me maximum durations, that of the critical path, and as it was, 3% probability of compliance. And I said, I'm a wizard, right? So what I said, right, let's get where we would finish off, where we would finish if we had an 85% probability. Another 8 months on the schedule, because it was a 5 or 6 year schedule, right? So I said, right, okay, so what we're going to do now is not fall into the trap that I done in that other project, but let's orchestrate and procedure for this. Do a method statement of, we go back, look at all the chains, each one of those, get a method statement to reduce it, and we bring it back those 6 months, put an activity called contingencies, put 100% probability, a 9-month activity, 100% probability of it being 0, we put a 0 pessimistic and 0 optimistic duration on the 9-month activity. And suddenly we've got a schedule that's got now only 3% possibility of complying with its earliest date, but it's got a 90% probability of complying with its late contingency date. And you've got the whole thing out of what could be a problem. You've brought a procedure and you sell it to the client. The client eventually didn't get the job. But I mean, in terms of using it, you're able to use it in a sensible way to try to get something that seems like, and then you manage the contingencies. And then you say, this month we have consumed 2 days. It's 3 days more than, or 2 days more than we expected. We didn't expect to consume any this month. So for me, it can be used. Otherwise, you start putting in plus 10%, minus 10%, and it's all just rubbish.
Yep. And I've got one more for you before I hand over to Dale, because I know he's got some questions for sure. Is, you know, the whole idea of the schedule is it kind of works in this vacuum chamber, and you put, you know, quality information in, and you have some basis of understanding of the calculations and the schedule and the logic. You mentioned logic a few times, which is really, really good. What about change when you have various activities that come in? People want to change things. Project managers love to do this. You know, or the environment changes naturally. There's things that come up and you have to add and remove. But at scale, you know, I find, at least on the projects that I've been on, that the volume of change is sometimes hard to catch up with.
Absolutely.
And you end up with this kind of backlog of changes that not in the schedule, because you're in this crazy month-end reporting cycle and the client's very demanding. And, you know, so you're saying, okay, well, I'll get them in next week. But by the time you do that, obviously there's a whole bunch of other changes. What's your view on the quality of change control within the schedule environment?
I think, to be quite honest, it's something I've always had a challenge with, me personally. So what, again, I go back to coding. And the only problem with, you know, typically I would have let's say a code for change orders or for change variation orders, and I would pull in the activity. But the problem, as you know yourself, you can't code the same variation order. Could be using different codes, you know, or sorry, the same code would do for 3 variation orders. So you can't have that. So sometimes I've used resources. I've used a suite of resources so that way I can pull out one activity that's applicable to 7 changes, right? And so I'm able to filter it out and be able to pull out only the path of the month past and whatever. But it is a big issue, and the sort of time slice type window analysis, it's a challenge because you have to know when it's introduced. As I say, if you have a good consistent monthly update cycle, the contractor thinks that it goes in his against him, but it really goes in his favor. If he's the only thing that's, when I've got into claims at the end of the project, the only thing that you cannot dispute normally is the truth. You can have different views of it, but the truth normally is your best companion, because it will be, by a judge, it will be seen by at least that it's a contemporary information. It's something that was fixed at that moment. It was communicated. So in that sense, a good update helps to establish the basis for these changes. But it's true, for me, change management, and I'm finding it a huge challenge in my Microsoft project integration into P6, and I'm having to use funny things, and I'm trying to procedurize it now to change the ID in Primavera to have the Microsoft unique ID as a text field, and just swap it over every time I want to change again, compare against the target. So when I get a new contractors program in, I bring it into Primavera, I change the ID into unique ID, and then I compare it to my unique ID swapped in my live program. But it's costing me. So change management, I'm finding myself doing things, Val, that's saying, at my age, is the company getting value out of what I'm doing, looking for these changes? I must admit, it's still, be very frank, Val, it's still a pending issue for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So if anyone can solve that for Martin and myself, please have a go.
Please.
Dale, over to you.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. It's interesting. You mentioned claims, Martin. So let's peel back some of the layers on that onion. Reference to a previous podcast
conversation.
Exactly. So are there, just bring it back to schedule quality, are there particular no-nos or simple wins that people listening to this can do to protect themselves from claims? So basically, if I ask that in a different way, are there things you've seen, whether it's in court or just in disputes or between the contract and client, where you've gone, actually, that was just a silly mistake. We could have avoided that. So some tips, perhaps, that those listening?
I would say, Dale, for me, one of the things people don't do properly is nurture the schedule. And this is one of the things with regard to change, Val, you mentioned. Not only is change a future thing, but change is also a past thing. There's a lot of things that happen, but they were born, if you like, they appeared 3 weeks ago, and they weren't on the schedule, they were unexpected. For me, it's vital to nurture, to bring back in actuals, even though it weren't in the baseline. No big deal. Build in. There's far too much tendency for people to try to be slave of the baseline. The baseline's a reference. If you've got a good coding bar stroke WBS stroke ID system, you'll be able to compare 30 activities was the first program with 3,000. No big deal. So don't be afraid of putting detail into the schedule, even if it's as-built detail. And for me, that's one thing. Secondly, do not tell lies in the schedule. You cannot be caught on a document, let's say a submission or something that you're depending upon to say that this was an RFI, or at least one of the important ones. This RFI came in this date, this affected the purchase, this affected the approval, and this was, and you're caught on dates. You cannot get caught on dates. It has to be as close to the truth as is reasonably possible. And particularly if you're in contemporaneous, you're doing it. And like I've had to reconstruct baselines and all sorts of stuff because it's been a piece of, even looking at progress photographs, trying to reconstruct the baseline because to know or when it could have been possibly envisaged to do this job. So for me, there's a couple of things. Tell the truth as much as humanly possible. There is, of course, depending on the side you're on, you can tweak it a little bit, but you have to tweak it just that amount that you're not going to be seen as being, as if you like, bad faith. And I would say the other thing is resources and the contemporaneous information. Do not present monthly reports. Do not present weekly reports. They have to get in. There's no excuse for a monthly report not getting submitted. And the client sometimes doesn't even want it because there's types of client that prefer not to know. You do it as a contractor, you get it in. As a client, you would demand it to be got in. For me, and the other thing we have from a client's perspective, I propose not only the typical sort of FIDIC type clause 20.1 notification, blah, blah, blah. I propose in the meetings, in the weekly meetings, do you have any claims? Do you have any claims? Anything we're owing you? Anything, anything that's holding you back? Mr. Contractor, do you have any claims? In the meeting, it gets signed. And it's very difficult to pull back from that as a contractor. Not only did you not, or yes, you submitted the 20.1, no, it's formal. No, you were asked, you were demanded every week to be truthful, to be da. And the clients tell us, you're inviting them to claim. We're not inviting them to claim. We're inviting them to come clean. We're inviting them to get it sorted. And for me, that's the type of stuff that helps in a really good way. It helps to get, and for me, so it's regular updates. The other one is, you cannot have, and one of the things with regard to detail, we talked about earlier, what sort of two subcontractors cannot be on the same activity. You cannot combine responsible entities on the same activity. That's one of the clear ideas on detail. So each contractor has to have his bit of the schedule there. Otherwise, how are you going to hold him to task if he hasn't even got the activities there? So for me, you have to have a good, solid argument. It may not be the full truth. It may not be even reasonable. But if you've got a good, solid argument and you've got documentation to back it up, and there's a reasonable link between cause and effect of data and the activities, then I think you're onto a fairly solid case.
Some great tips there, some amazing insight, and obviously born out of experience, not just, you're not just making up, which is fantastic as well. But I want to also ask you around, we've spoken a lot about what it takes to build quality into a schedule. Now, there will be those that listen to this and go, well, we just don't have the time to do all of this. And what are the chances it'll actually result in anything big anyway? How much time should we allocate on average as a percentage to working in the schedule and getting this right? And then also, perhaps you could talk about, correlation in not getting it right and resulting in cost impacts.
Well, I remember I said earlier regarding the number of activities per planner, right?
Yep.
So that's important because, you're looking at, let's say 200 activities a month, 24-month contract. Just imagine, let's say we're on site, just for the hell of it. We're on construction. Let's say you're looking at 4,800 activities in 2 years, one planner, right? So for me, if you've got a planner, and my way of doing the schedule is it's an interrogation of the site team, right? So I'm just a humble planner, if you like. I try to get into that guise of being an interviewer. And I've got formats, and I'm sorry I'm not into Post-its. I just think it's a waste of paper, to be quite honest. I think it's going backwards. I honestly think it's too much paper. I've got formats that we can reproduce, and it's an A3 so that even a man can write in a straight line, more or less, and listen to the next activity. So the computer's not in front of us, right? We shouldn't have the computer in front of us. I should be sitting down with a form, an A3 form for 30 activities, and I put my logic on this, and I put my descriptions, I put my resources, and I'm sitting interviewing the guy who's the owner. He has to be the owner of the program. And I think one of the problems we've got is that the planner assumes ownership of the program, and that's wrong. The planner is in ivory tower, thinking that he's an end in itself, and I've seen that far too many times. And the planner is only a means, in my opinion. He is supporting the project management or site management function. So for me, there is no reason whatsoever let's imagine a fixed price contract. We're not talking about an industrial type thing where we still have a load of stuff to design. Let's just imagine typical more JCT, fixed price type, whatever contract, 40 million, 50 million. Imagine, just for the hell of it, 2-year contract. One planner with the availability of time, by taking them by the hair, by whatever intimate part of their body they need to be taken by, into a room, investigate, getting the different areas of the project, splitting out the job into geographical areas that are unique, and then sitting down and interview with the responsibles. There's no reason that in 1 month you haven't got a full-blown detailed schedule with your whole purchasing communication, purchasing strings of your 40 packages, 15 activities per package, of your whole procurement strings, LinkedIn, package code, the whole regalia. One person, 5,000 activities. I think I've even thought about number of activities per million euros, 30 to 50 activities per million euros, just for the hell of it. Right? Of course, there's different, but imagine in that case, 60 million, you're looking at 7,000, well, I don't know, whatever the maths. But the idea, in 1 month, you should, of really hitting it hard, you should get a decent schedule that, of course, you'll have to change every month. But you've got a full-blown schedule in a month, and you not sit back, but then I've got less change because you've done logic links. Then you will be talking about more the number of resources. This guy is delayed, so we're going to have to change the sequence. Fine, that's normal stuff, but you cannot be inventing the schedule 8 months into the contract with design that could have been done at the beginning, because to link in generic to detail is terribly difficult. I find it a pain in the butt when you can get the small modules, detail them out, and multiply them as and modify them as necessary. So I honestly feel from an effort point of view, like at the moment, and as I say, we sometimes have to dip not that detail into the schedules, but typically I've got a planner in my head office when we're doing the head office, and I'm now one of the planners. We could be managing, different types of jobs. Some of them could be 10 million euros, 5 million euros, right? And we could be managing the schedule of 6 or 8 projects, one planner. Simple. The updates, and then the development. You've only got one every 4 months, right? So you put that into the 2 weeks in the middle of the month, and the last week of the month, the first week of the month, you're just full steam ahead. Every one of the monthly reports has to be out by the 7th of the month or the 10th maximum, or we get hit on the head by the client. So it can be, when you get into a standardized mode, and maybe you don't get into the depth, and that's obviously one of the negative sides of this. But then you get to a point where you've got planners that are into full blast, and then you send them on the site on a big job. One of the girls that she's now in the UN, We do the
Wow.
we've been doing the refurbishment of the UN in Geneva from 2012. She is now the planner for the UN, and she was been with me for 3 years, and 27-year-old. She's now the planner for the UN, and it's a
Wow.
massive project.
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
but because you're into a mode of work, and of course you lack experience, and of course you lack. There's a lot of stuff you lack, but from a quality point of view, you approach things from a quality point of view, and then you're dragged into the mire sometimes. But it's very difficult for a planner to get on site and be brought up into the quality. There will be far more tendency to be kept down in the mire, kept down in the knee-jerk reaction, kept down in just surviving every week, instead of getting in there from an idea. We need to get this full-blown schedule in 1 month and hit it hard, and get anybody that needs to get in here, get them in, and bring it back to them. And at night you're doing the sequence, and you bring it back, and you integrate it, and you bring it all up. So for me, it's a big advantage for me to have the centralized thing, because you're doing the brainwashing ahead of time, and they hit the ground, I would like to think, running.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said it as well. Is that, quality doesn't necessarily mean so many layers of activity. That doesn't mean, because you often hear this argument that, oh, you don't have enough activities in your schedule, the quality is not there. But I'm so glad you said that. But I just wanted to ask as well, do we have stats on correlation between quality schedules and successful delivery of projects? Do we have stats on that? And maybe even go a bit further and say, actually, we have causation that quality schedules drive successful delivery. Do we have that yet? Or is that something that we need to do?
I don't. I've done, as I say, my only experience was with 50 projects that I analyzed of ours in the last 20 years. And we had this 7% average deviation. And that was due to lack of competencies. And I think at least that was my pat on the back for myself, because I was responsible for the planning of it, right? So, but it would seem sensible to think, look, why, so we don't have any wriggle room, But one of the things I have known, and one of the things I have tell planners, is that it's the no-no, an absolute no-no, is that through lack of your ability to manage the schedule, the project delays. And I had a case where, for instance, resource-loaded schedules. This is another big issue. We don't resource load, we do resource. If a contractor really wants to resource load, it isn't a big deal. It's a couple of days of work and you get it done. Anybody should know. And statistically, on a bigger schedule, the errors compensate. And I've got statistics on the number of resources that more or less should come out, blah, blah, the number of hours. And then I check that with the details. But if I've got resources in the schedule, and if I'm looking at the histograms of the painters, or I'm looking at the histograms of the ductwork guys, or whatever, what if I typically will never want to link all of the activities between each other. Otherwise, the schedule is terrible in terms of stress. It's just too stressed and it's a disaster. So typically I would link a couple of activities at the beginning that are linked through the schedule as resource links, and at the end, and then I close the floats now. But one of the things, and I just mentioned it the other day to this lady, this new girl that's in the thing. So I've got this problem where all of the predecessors of the linked activities, let's say the excavation of different blocks, had been done, and the next activity wasn't linked between each other. And suddenly I'm not managing that, and it jumps into vertical, and I don't realize it. And then it comes down to the subcontractor's not able to do it. So I have to link it. And suddenly, out of my fault as a planner, that schedule in 1 month has delayed 3 weeks because there was links that were missing, because activities. So I have layouts that I'm looking at how the activities, if I don't have resource loaded, because the resource is best, because I look at vertical histograms and I know that that's the problem. But if I look at a layout that has got all my activities, for instance, I have an activity code that links every single similar activity on the schedule. So ductwork's always a code. So I organize it by activity, and I see how many ductworks have been done simultaneous. Where you can break down the bars into little bits, and you start looking at risk there. And this is where, for me, this is the bad quality, and I've fallen into it in the past as well, where I've let the schedule go, or I don't give it the little bit of nice, tender loving care that it needs during the month. And suddenly, when I link it back into what the subcontractor says he's going to be able to do, suddenly it blasts itself out of the water. And everybody looks to me, or I tried to hide it. Thankfully now I've got enough age not to hide it, and I just say, look guys, come and get me. I haven't had enough time or whatever. But this is one of the things where the hygiene of the schedule is vital. And this is where the coding is vital. You need codes. You need to be able to look at the forest and not the thing. But statistically, other than what I've mentioned earlier regarding the correlation, unfortunately, I don't have it.
No, that's, I mean, you know, maybe there's someone out there that, you know, will do this and gather the information. It's fantastic. But Mr. Martin Murphy, I love your passion. I don't know if it's the Irish in you, the Spanish in you.
There's
maybe
a mix here.
The mix.
My Spanish wife has helped a lot.
It's absolutely fantastic, and we could literally talk to you for hours and hours, if not days. But I do want to make space for our feature, because I want to see if you can put that same passion into defending the indefensible. Now, for this, young Martin is back in the hot seat.
Right. Thanks, Dale. It's our guest feature. It's called Defend the Indefensible. It's where we invite our guests to defend a ridiculous statement for 30 seconds. Right. It's inspired by some of the ridiculous things we've all heard over the course of our careers. And I imagine you've heard quite a few over the course of yours, yes. Given the subject. So if you're willing and if you're keen.
Absolutely.
Let's make a start.
I'm Irish.
Brilliant. So, Martin, you have 30 seconds to defend the following statement. We don't need detailed schedules. We only need the milestone target dates for everyone to follow. Discuss.
We have enough experience on this project to be able to, we have internal processes that guarantee that each of these intermediate milestones are being hit. We have a process internally that we have Excel sheets that show that with checklists, that once you reach a percentage of your checklist, the milestone is in danger of completion. So we run everything with checklists, and we have seen that in the past, it is the best system because you don't complicate things. It's binary, it's measurable. Everybody's focused. It's on everybody's screen. Nobody has to worry about bars because people hit bars. So it's a great communication tool. We can put it in red, green, and we can put everybody's responsibility for each level, each line of the Excel. And we guarantee the compliance with the milestone. And we even got a bit of contingency before each milestone on the last line of each Excel sheet. Was that 30 seconds?
That's fantastic. You can really feel the passion there. Didn't seem too painful either.
I've worked in claims, guys. I can defend anything.
Thanks a lot.
Awesome.
Before we go, we've got time for one more feature called Fiverr. 5 quick fire questions all about yourself. So again,
yes.
If you're willing.
Absolutely.
Let's make a start. Question 1. Would you rather spend your day with people or technology?
People.
What's more important, time, cost, or quality?
Quality.
What's the best book you've been gifted?
The memoirs of Winston Churchill, the Second World War.
Interesting. What's the biggest mistake you've made on a project?
I would like to think building a schedule after months of very heavy work that I had to throw into the bin and start again.
Oh, wow. Ouch. Last one. What profession other than your own would you like to have attempted?
Honestly, probably I would have liked to be a carer in an old people's home.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
I still have the possibility once I retire. If I ever be able to retire, I could do.
He schedules the fixtures, yeah.
Yes, exactly. The quality, the reason I asked, that's the 5 questions, correct?
Yeah.
The reason for the quality is that it's everlasting. We can forgive a project that Aaron came in late, that was over budget, but we cannot forgive a project that's going to be there for 30 years and looks like a piece of shit.
Definitely. That's what you remember.
That's what and the other one, overarching over all of those, and that's after being project manager on the skyscraper in Madrid, health and safety. That's the one thing that for me was the one thing that kept me up. Everything else, I didn't give a toss as project manager. For me, that someone was going to have a serious injury today, that was the thing that for me, overarching everything else, to be quite honest.
Yeah, very well put, Martin. It's interesting that we forget sometimes why we're delivering projects ultimately, not for profit, but actually every project you're involved in impacts someone else's life in some way, shape, or form. Absolutely. And I think a lot of people forget that sometimes, especially when you're in the throes of delivering the project and you only focus on a single task or activity. So thanks for reminding us about that. But if there's, hopefully, folks, you can now find Wally. If you can't find Wally, please get in touch with Martin Murphy. He will help you find Wally, because he's demystified a lot about what makes a quality schedule here. And you will have to go back and rewind, because we went down a lot of rabbit holes. And I, for one, will go back. I've made so many notes, Martin. And again, we'd love to have you back and chat more about this topic or other topics as well. But before we let you go, do you have any final thoughts you want to leave the listeners with?
No, I think I started in London with Higgs & Hill, highly, highly reputable firm in the 80s, and one huge history. Nearly all of their senior management were ex-planners. I was highly fortunate to be grounded in that. And for me, it's an incredible, I love it as a profession. Planning, obviously the bigger arching project control, because I think there's a communication element in the project controls that you can't lose. And I think it's an incredibly satisfying career, and I think that's something I would like people to have a passion about, and we don't get taught enough of it during our university degrees. We don't get taught nearly anything about it, and it's one of the 4 major objectives of a project, including safety.
Yeah,
we get taught a lot about cost, but we don't get taught about planning.
Yeah, very well put. Well, final thoughts.
Oh, look, that was, I'm going to do the same thing and go back and listen through this. Again, Mr. Martin Murphy, we would love to have you back. But also, I think what you said is really true about planning. We don't teach young kids enough about planning. And I think you would probably agree that planning actually spills into your other avenues of life, like
absolutely
planning a wedding or planning a holiday in Spain.
I done mine in Petronas.
Did you really?
Literally.
You could probably make a lot of money.
That up?
Yeah.
Everybody's got their issues here, right? So.
Did the wife see that?
She helped me to do it. She is even more organized than I am. I'm organized in a work way. She is organized in her whole life. That's probably how I am the way I am.
You could probably get a template, pick up a template for martinmurphy.com probably, but you could definitely apply the skills, the life lessons, I guess, from planning. Absolutely. And working with the end in mind, I think is a really valuable lesson. So for all those planners and those aspirational planners, wanting to get into the craft, do listen to this. Do check out some of our other episodes. But thank you for your time today, mate.
Not at all, Val. Very pleased. And anytime I would be delighted to be back for any other similar subject or anything. Even if I know nothing, I'll speak about it.
Fantastic. Well, folks, that's it. Time's up. Remember to hit subscribe before you go. A massive thank you to Mr. Martin Murphy, and thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me, Val, and baby Martin, it's bye for now.
Goodbye to all of you.